here we are again. It's quite rainy and awful and cold outside, and therefore it's quite dry, but also awful and cold inside, so hence the toque. I'm just finishing the pleating of this kilt in the brown tartan. The customer chose the red stripe on blue, and it's going to look very effective because when it's pressed, it's going to be very effective contrast between the apron and the back, very pleasing contrast. And when he walks, you're going to get that flash as it opens up, and you get that strong contrast to the black. Quite happy about that. Now, when I was starting this, I had it took me a little while to get started because I was concerned about the choice of color for the thread, and this also is in response to a question asked recently about whether it'd be a good idea to change the color of thread as you progress along the seam. I don't think so. I've tried that before. It didn't work out well because if you're sewing a block of color and then stop and knot it and hide the knot, and then switching color, if you're going to change at those intervals between colors without any overlap, this is going to be a bit of a weak point in the seam, and I think it's going to gape a little bit. I think that's what happened when I tried it in the past. Because when I'm sewing a seam and I find that the thread isn't quite long enough, which irritatingly it'll be like within an inch or so from the top, and I have to splice in another piece. That's the key word, is splice. Is that if I'm sewing for a bit, if I'm starting another seam, I'm going to start back about an inch or so, the width of the thumb, back from where my first seam ended, and to carry on so that we have proper mechanical integrity along the length of the seam. So changing colors along the course of the seam, I don't think it's a good idea. I mean, you're welcome to try, and if you can find a way that actually makes it work, that doesn't produce a compromised seam, wonderful, share it with us. On the other hand, when I'm working on a kilt pleated to the set, and we are dealing with changes in blocks of color along an entire length of the seam, what I will do is I'll change color. So this first seam was in black, this seam was in red, black, blue. I think I used dark blue thread there, black again, red through that section, and again from top to bottom, because I think when choosing the thread, you'll find, because what I'd done, I'll back up a bit, because I just had this niggling suspicion in the back of my mind, and you always learn to trust your hunches, and if your subconscious is elbowing you in the ribs and saying, hey, I think you should look at this again, pay attention to that. So what I did was I took the top strip, torn off when we reduced it to the proper length, and I made up a sample seam, and I sewed it in black. And I was like, okay, it's a bit visible. It creates a bit of a shadow effect on the seam because of the black thread. Not on the black, of course, but on the two lighter colors. The stitches weren't screamingly obvious, but it did create sort of a shadowing effect. So then I pressed it with a steam in the way I do, with a wet cloth, shot of water, wet cloth, hot iron, and then let it dry. And it made the stitching, it reduced the apparent effect of the black, but there's still a bit of shadowing. So what I would recommend is that if you're not sure about a seam, about the thread, to do this little trick, make up a sample pleat on the top, sew it, and see how it looks. Although, because this is going to be the top strip, and this part of the top strip here is going to be the most visible in the entire kilt because it's at the top of the front apron, I would do the experiments on the other end, because with the other end of this 8-yard piece of cloth, you can make as many sample seams as you like with different colors of thread, press them all at the same time, and then after they dry, you can look at them and see which of them actually is the most effective color, because you'll quite often be surprised. I find that a thread that's ever so slightly darker. Now I chose brown because, let's face it, I have quite a bit of experience in this by now. So I had a brown thread handy. I ran the seam the first seam, and I went, perfect, got it first try. But it wasn't the first try. There were several tries, several efforts in the past and previous kilts where I'd already learned that lesson. But so yeah, you can do that trick. Try sample seams with different colors of thread, iron them, let them dry, judge them to see which is the best. And I think, because sometimes there's not going to be anything else for it. You're going to have to head out to the sewing supply place and buy some more threads to experiment with. But I think one of the factors is where you most have to pay attention, and where the color difference. And again, it's not going to be an apparent color difference, because if I sewed this in the same red palette that we have here, it would be quite obvious. If you go slightly darker, it seems to help. In fact, it invariably helps. So a slightly darker thread than the lightest panel in the seam that you're doing. And also, again, the contrast is going to stand out most strongly with the red, slightly, less strongly with the blue-red mix there, and presumably less strongly still with the black there. But it still requires a careful seam. And when I say that, you can't just pick up a couple of yarns, right? I mean, you could do a very nice seam. And granted, I'm sewing about 12 stitches to the inch, but if you don't pick up enough thread with your needle, you run the risk. I mean, it's a very, very beautiful seam right up to the moment that it's, for whatever reason, it comes under tension. Because if the thread is just picking up a couple of yarns, the thread is, even a cotton thread, is going to be stronger than these woolen yarns, at least stronger than how the yarn is held in place by friction, by inertia. So if you pick up too light, if you just catch the material a little bit, if that comes under tension, you're going to be pulling the yarns out, and it's going to be hellaciously difficult to fix. So there we go. Hope that helps. Hope that answers the question. Pay most attention to the area of greatest contrast. Pick a thread that's slightly darker. Experiment. Don't be afraid to iron it and let it dry to see, because I think after it's ironed, the yarn kind of it's the nap, as it were. It creates a bit of a nap, and some yarns, some ends come out, and makes it a bit, to use a very technical phrase, a bit fuzzy. It also makes the seam harder to see. But don't think about doing that trick, and good luck with your sewing. Thank you.